My mom hasn't been eating or sleeping well these past few days because her big yellow dog, Suazi, which she kept back in our hometown, went missing. I found out from my uncle over the phone. 2 months ago, I brought my mom to the city to enjoy her retirement, leaving Suazi at his house to be taken care of. Ever since she found out, my mom has been in a daze, frequently giving me and my wife these pleading looks, wanting to say something but holding back. I knew she wanted to go back to the village to look for Suazi. Honestly, Suazi has been with us for over 10 years, ever since we brought her home as a puppy. I was anxious too when I heard she was missing. But with the new year approaching, we were planning to celebrate it in the village anyway. It's better to wait until after the new year to return. Suazi is clever. If she gets hungry, she'll definitely return to my uncle's house. My wife and I have only been married for 6 months. She's a city girl, and it's already a big deal for her to be okay with my mom living with us. Asking her to spend the new year in the countryside was something I knew she wouldn't be thrilled about. With no other options, I pretended not to see my mom's pitiful looks and tried to distract her with cheerful TV shows. But one day, my mom went out for a walk and didn't come back. When I got home from work, my wife anxiously told me that my mom had been missing for 8 or 9 hours. Cold sweat broke out all over me. She wasn't familiar with the city. What if she was lost? My wife and I searched the entire neighborhood and even filed a report with the police, but after searching late into the night, she still wasn't back. We sat at home, helpless and worried, when my uncle called. My mom had told him she was heading back and had somehow found her way to the train station and bought a ticket. I was at a loss. My dad passed away last year, so if she went back, she'd be all alone. There was no way I could let her spend New Year's alone. So, despite my wife's resentful look, I bought 2 train tickets, and we headed back to find her. Even after the train started moving, my wife was still complaining, making comments about how my mom shouldn't have caused us so much trouble over a dog. The more I listened, the angrier I got. When she wouldn't stop, I snapped. Just shut up. My wife had never heard me raise my voice, let alone yell at her. Embarrassed, her face turned bright red. It's just a dog. I was furious, ready to start an argument, but when I saw her starting to cry, my anger dissipated. She was raised pampered, standing up against her family to be with a country boy like me. She had stuck with me through everything. I had promised her I'd always be good to her. Taking a deep breath, I pulled her into my arms, softening my tone. Suazi isn't just any dog. She was the first gift my dad ever gave my mom. Huh. My wife looked up at me, her big eyes blinking, suddenly interested. I sat her down and began telling her Suazi's story. Suazi came to our home when she was only a month old, a fluffy little thing. Back then, my mom and dad were always fighting. My mom would try everything to keep him from leaving for work. She said that if Dad left, with me boarding at the school in town, she wouldn't have anyone to talk to. Dad found it amusing. All the other women in the village wanted their husbands to go off and earn more money, but my mom was the only one who didn't want hers to leave. Just then, Dad's friend's dog had a litter of puppies. For some reason, Dad decided to bring one of them home and handed it to my mom. We're poor, and I've never given you a gift since we got married. Here's a little dog for you. While I'm away working, it can keep you company. I was there at the time too, watching as my mom happily took the puppy into her arms, stroking its fluffy little head. This is your first gift to me. But then she suddenly turned gloomy, saying, they say men who leave for work find mistresses. I'm scared. Dad was taken aback for a moment, then smiled wryly. He reached out and playfully pinched her cheek, but quickly withdrew his hand when he noticed me watching. In a gruff voice, he said, you've got me locked down tight. How would I have the time or energy to find someone else? Mom blushed and fidgeted for a while before reluctantly saying, let's name the dog Suazi as a reminder that I'll be here waiting for you. They carried on with their conversation, completely ignoring me. Bored, I shrugged and went back to my room to do my homework. Seems like this were normal for me. My mom always acted like a lovesick girl around Dad, while I, on the sidelines, felt like a giant third wheel. always shining brightly. Dad went off to work for 8 or 9 months, and when the group he had gone with returned, they said that my dad was a real workhorse at the factory. As long as there was overtime pay, he'd work several shifts in a row. In his free time, he wouldn't go drinking or hang out aimlessly. He saved all the money to send back to my mom. They even said the boss really appreciated him, calling him honest and reliable, and made him the team leader. He was earning more than the other workers from our village. People in the village envied my mom for having such a hardworking husband, and the amount of money he sent back kept increasing. But despite that, my mom wasn't happy. At the time, I didn't enjoy talking with my mom. After spending so much time in town, I felt we had nothing in common anymore. Mom would talk to Suazi all the time. She often mumbled to Suazi, "Your dad works so hard. I wonder how many times his stomach problems have flared up. And why is he so stubborn? No matter what I say, he won't come back. He talks about earning money to settle in the city, but how could a city ever feel like home?" Suazi would stare at her with round, black eyes, nudging her hand with her wet nose, her big tail wagging lazily. My mom adored Suazi, feeding her until she became plump and shiny, her yellow coat glistening. Suazi was the fiercest and bravest dog in the village. Even though she was a female, not a single male dog could beat her in a fight. When I was away at school, I never worried about my mom being alone. With Suazi around, nothing could go wrong. But one day, I realized I had placed too much trust in Suazi. No matter how brave she was still just a simple dog, no match for the evil in human hearts. One day, a teacher at school called me, saying something had happened at home. My mom had been arrested. Panic surged through me. I rushed home and found out from my uncle that my mom had narrowly avoided disaster. There was a village vet who had committed theft in his younger years and could never find a wife. A few nights ago, he snuck into our house with a tranquilizer gun, knocked out Suazi, and entered the house to steal. But stealing wasn't enough for him. Seeing that there was no man in the house, he thought he could take advantage of my mom. Luckily, my mom, afraid of intruders, always kept a kitchen knife by her bedside. When she realized the vet had entered, she fought him off. With a do-or-die resolve, she managed to injure the vet with the knife, leaving blood all over the floor, and prevented him from succeeding. The situation got serious with bloodshed, and both my mom and the vet ended up at the police station. My uncle and I were frantic. We called my dad's factory and then waited outside the police station all night. At dawn, my mom was released. The police found the vet's criminal record and discovered he still had our savings book in his pocket. They ruled that my mom had acted in self-defense and cleared her of any responsibility. When we got home, Suazi was still groggy from the tranquilizer, wobbling her way over to my mom. My uncle, irritated, moved to kick her and cursed, "What good are you?" But my mom yanked him back, almost making him stumble. "This is the dog that your brother-in-law gave me. Just try kicking her." My uncle rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, "I told you not to marry that poor guy, but you didn't listen. Now look at the life you're stuck with." My mom snapped back at him, "I'm happy to suffer if it's with him." But my dad wasn't happy. He rushed back home the very next day. It was the first time I'd seen my dad with red eyes, pacing around the front of the police station with a kitchen knife in hand. My mom and uncle had to drag him back and explain repeatedly that the vet was no longer there. Dad pulled my mom into his arms, saying nothing as tears streamed down his face. My mom comforted him like he was a child, gently patting his back and softly saying, "It's all fine now, see? I'm right here." Still worried, my dad sent me back to school, left Suazi at my uncle's place, and took my mom away. He told my uncle, "I'm done. I'm quitting. I'm coming home. But we can't just leave without informing the boss. We need to wrap things up properly." He couldn't even bear to leave my mom at my uncle's place, so he took her with him. When they returned, my mom was all smiles, but Dad was grim as he went to pick up Suazi and me for the school break. I didn't dare ask why he looked so upset, so I secretly asked my uncle. He told me that my dad had taken my mom to the mall, bought her some clothes and a necklace, and the moment Dad wasn't looking, Mom went and returned everything after asking around. With the refund, she bought milk powder, Ovaltine, and other nutritional items for my dad, as suggested by the shop assistant. Since food items couldn't be returned, my parents came back from the city with a huge bag of groceries. My dad was so angry that he refused to eat any of it, so the food ended up as treats for me and my cousins. We were in the middle of enjoying it when a commotion erupted outside. We rushed out to see my dad pinning down Wang Er, hitting him. My dad and Wang Er were good friends, so no one expected them to get into a fight. The villagers hurried to pull them apart, while my dad pointed at Wang Er with a fierce expression, saying, "If I hear you talk nonsense again, I'll end you." Wang Er slunk away, hugging the wall, while my mom ran home crying, with my dad chasing after her. Confused, I followed behind with Suazi. At the door, I overheard my mom sobbing. "What Wang Er said isn't true. I didn't let the vet touch me. Do you believe me?" My dad's voice was trembling. "Even if you had, aren't you still my wife? It's my fault for not protecting you. I'm a disgrace as a man, letting you suffer like that." Hearing this made me feel awful. I wanted to take Suazi and leave, giving them space to talk. But Suazi, hearing my mom cry, started scratching at the door, whining pitifully. My dad opened the door and let Suazi in. I hesitated, wondering if I should leave, but my dad called me in. Inside, my mom was hugging Suazi, crying. Suazi gently licked away her tears with her little pink tongue, whimpering softly, as if crying too. My dad patted me on the shoulder and said, "I failed to protect your mom. That's on me. Remember, when I'm old and weak, you'll have to take care of her for me. Don't let anyone hurt her. Got it?" I nodded firmly and sat down beside my mom. She held me close, stroking Suazi's head as her tears slowly dried up. My dad walked over, putting one arm around my mom's neck and the other around me, pulling us close to him. Suazi ran around us, glancing between each of us, and soon started barking happily again. This time, my dad stayed home and didn't think about leaving again. The others who had gone to work with him returned, telling my dad that the factory boss kept asking about him and was even willing to offer a raise to get him back. But my dad shook his head and refused, saying he couldn't leave my mom alone at home. So my parents borrowed some money and started a chicken farm. They worked from dawn until dusk every day. My dad would say, "The women in the city wear such nice clothes and jewelry. One day, I'll dress you up like them, and you'll look even better." My mom wouldn't let it go, insisting that my dad must have found a woman in the city, pinching his ear hard. My dad just chuckled, his ear turning red as he grinned. "None of those women are half as beautiful as my wife. Do you think I'm stupid enough to waste my money on them?" Blushing, my mom became bashful and didn't say anything more. At that point, I felt awkward. With nothing to contribute, I just slipped away to do my homework. Suazi, however, never seemed embarrassed by her role as the third wheel. She would run around happily at my parents' feet, excitedly watching my dad tease my mom. The rest of the time, Suazi busied herself chasing after the little chicks, but she was smart. She never hurt a single one. She'd sniff them, play around, and then let them go. By then, Suazi's main job was to keep my mom happy, with her side gig being the head of security at the chicken farm. For the first time, I realized that a dog could be just as effective at catching mice as a cat. Thanks to Suazi's vigilance, the chicks grew strong, and not a single mouse managed to get away with anything. The chicken farm prospered, and after a few years, we paid off all our debts. We renovated the house and bought all the appliances we needed. My mom started wearing wool coats and had a gold necklace and bracelet. Dad even bought her some lipstick and took her to town to get a quirky perm. The villagers, seeing how well our family was doing, began to gossip behind my mom's back, warning her to keep an eye on my dad. When men get rich, they turn bad. It's all the rage to have a mistress now. My mom would roll her eyes and say, "You just worry about your own husband. Mine? There's no way he'd mess around. His character is rock solid." But back home, she'd threaten my dad, saying she'd die if he ever dared to take a mistress. My dad, tired of hearing it, would pinch her lips shut. I don't even carry a penny in my pocket. How am I supposed to afford a mistress? My mom would eye him suspiciously, and he'd sigh, sitting down next to her. I told you when I married you that I'd be loyal to you for life. That's my promise until the day I die. That made my mom happy, but my dad wasn't so pleased. People in the village would tease him, saying he was henpecked and had no backbone. My dad would show off his fists, as big as sandbags, waving them in their faces. I enjoy spoiling my wife. If you think that makes me weak, let's fight it out and see who's really weak. No one in the village dared to fight my dad, and after a while, the gossip died down. Thanks to my parents, I never experienced hardship. I graduated from college smoothly, found a decent job, and started dating a proper girlfriend. When my dad found out, he gave me a stern talk. If you don't intend to spend your life with her, don't take advantage of her. Our family has always valued decency. If you've already taken advantage of her, then bring her home to meet us and make it official. I nodded seriously, but didn't say anything. I was unsure. My girlfriend had been pampered her whole life. What if she looked down on the fact that we were from the countryside? What if I brought her home and she changed her mind? Then my parents would be hurt for no reason. I regret my hesitation to this day. Before I could bring her home to meet him, my dad collapsed suddenly. That very morning, he had been talking about how Suazi was already 15 years old and had grown so old, she barely moved. By noon, he took a nap and never woke up. He left so suddenly that my mom even forgot to cry. My uncle and I wept like the world had ended, and I refused to eat or drink, wishing I could take my dad's place. But my mom kept cooking and eating her 3 meals a day without shedding a single tear. She even made sure Suazi's meals weren't missed. I had never seen my mom so calm. Before, she had always seemed like a child around my dad, but the day he passed, she suddenly became an elderly woman, both in looks and manner. That night, she measured the fabric and sewed my dad a suit, carefully cleaning his body and dressing him. As she worked, she murmured, "When you get there, you've got to look sharp. If you get lonely and decide to find someone, don't let them turn you down because you look shabby." She prepared a whole table of food, dish by dish, placing it at the altar, saying, "You never ate properly. Now that you've gone to a new place, make sure to eat more so you'll have the strength to defend yourself." She picked her best photo of herself and placed it inside his coffin. "If you don't want to find someone else and still miss me, take a look at this from time to time. Don't you dare forget about me after I've joined you. I won't let you off the hook." For 3 whole days, she handled the funeral with efficiency during the day and whispered endlessly to my dad's spirit at night, but not a single tear was shed. On the day of the burial, after the earth had been laid, she took out a bottle of strong liquor and poured half of it onto his grave. "I never let you drink when I was around, but I know you loved it. Now that you're gone, you can have a proper drink. I'll join you for 2 sips." She tipped the bottle to her lips and drained it in one go. A single tear rolled down her cheek. With my dad gone, my mom took over running the chicken farm alone. The business didn't improve, but it didn't get worse either. No one could tell that my mom was grieving. The villagers all said she had a heart of iron. Her husband treated her so well when he was alive, but now she's acting like nothing happened. But I knew better. At night, my mom always called Suazi to sleep by her feet. She could no longer sleep through the night. She would wake up 4 or 5 times, and whenever I visited, I could hear her talking to Suazi from my room. "Do you think ghosts exist, Suazi? How come everyone says their loved ones come to them in dreams, but I haven't had a single one?" Old Suazi would respond with a soft whimper, and my mom would continue, "I finally understand how hard he worked. Running this chicken farm looks easy, but it's tough. I shouldn't have given him such a hard time back then." Suazi scratched at the floor with her paws, and my mom, as if soothing a child, said, "Suazi, please live a few more years. Whenever I see you, I think of the time he gave you to me, how strong he was back then." Suazi whined softly, and my mom fell silent, letting out only a sigh. Lying in bed, I felt as if a lump of cotton was stuffed in my chest, suffocating me. I pulled the covers over my head and cried. As my relationship with my girlfriend deepened, I noticed my mom was sleeping less and less. I discussed with my girlfriend about getting married soon, thinking that some good news might cheer my mom up. When we returned to the village for the wedding banquet, my mom held my girlfriend's hand, looking her up and down. A smile I hadn't seen in a long time spread across her face. She organized the wedding with great enthusiasm and gave my girlfriend, no, my wife, a large red envelope. My wife was exhausted from the day's festivities and fell asleep before we even had the chance to consummate the marriage. I went to my mom's room. My dad's photo, which used to hang in the living room, had been moved there because my mom said she didn't want to scare my wife. She had even hidden Suazi because my wife didn't like dogs. As I reached my mom's door, I heard her talking, "Hey, your son is married now. Our daughter-in-law is beautiful. I took care of all the wedding arrangements, though I'm not as good as you. Don't laugh at me." Suazi whimpered again, and I heard my mom continue, "Such a big event in our family, and you didn't even show up in my dreams. Even if you don't want to talk, at least let me see you. If you don't come soon, I might forget what you look like." After a pause, she added, "I'm lying. You're built like a tank. I'll never forget you. Not in this life or the next." I stood there for a long time, just like I used to when they joked around. Then, I quietly crept back to my room, lying down but unable to sleep for hours. After I got married, my mom became more and more withdrawn. She would either sit holding my dad's photo, mumbling to it, or reminiscing with Suazi about the past. I had heard that elderly people living alone are prone to illness, and I was always worried. I discussed bringing my mom to live with us with my wife. I could tell that my wife wasn't thrilled about it, but I couldn't leave my mom alone in the village. Fortunately, despite my wife's occasional stubbornness, she was reasonable when it came to big matters. She took the initiative to tidy up the guest room and went with me to pick up my mom. I knew my mom didn't want to leave, but I didn't expect her to be so resolute. No matter what I said, she wouldn't budge. In the end, I had to lie to her, telling her my wife was pregnant and needed her help. Only then did she soften. She sold the chicken farm, left Suazi with my uncle, and followed us to the city. But pregnancy can't be faked, especially not with a woman who's given birth herself. When my mom realized we had deceived her, she wanted to go back immediately, and I had to practically beg her to stay. My wife, however, said, if she's uncomfortable, it's better for her to return home. Hearing this made me angry, and my wife said no more. But this time, my mom secretly ran back to the village to look for Suazi, and I didn't even have time to stop her. As my story reached this point, the train pulled into the station. My wife sat across from me, her face streaked with tears, sobbing uncontrollably. When the train stopped, her earlier reluctance had vanished. She got off quicker than I did, pulling me along to catch the bus to the village. On the bus, she clung to my arm, leaning into me and softly asked, "Will you treat me the way your dad treated your mom?" I wrapped my arm around her, holding her tighter. Yes. She was about to say something else when my uncle called, telling me that my mom wasn't home and no one knew where she had gone. I became restless on the bus, and my wife gently stroked my arm to comfort me. "Don't worry, I think I know where she is." Surprised, I looked at her. "How do you know? Did she contact you?" She shook her head. "We're both women, and we both have loved ones. I can guess." After getting off the bus, my wife insisted that we go to visit my dad's grave first. I was anxious to go back to the village and look for my mom, but my wife was adamant. My dad's grave wasn't far from the village. Realizing I hadn't had the chance to visit before the new year or talk to him, I agreed, and we took a detour. As we neared the grave, I spotted my mom. She was sitting in front of the tombstone, her head resting against it. Her white hair was blowing in the wind, but her posture was like that of a young girl. Suazi lay lazily at her feet. When she saw us, she gently wagged her tail, as a greeting. My wife hurried forward, kneeling in front of my mom, her tears falling again. "Mom, we're here to visit Dad with you." My mom looked up at us, surprised. "You really came back?" My wife nodded. "Yes. We came home to spend the new year together." Wiping the tombstone with her sleeve, my mom said softly, "Look, dear, our son and daughter-in-law are so thoughtful. They came back to keep you company. We're all together again for a family new year." My wife choked up as she helped my mom to her feet. "Mom, let's go home. I'll make 2 dishes for Dad." "Huh? Oh, right, let's go home," my mom said, standing up as Suazi shook her fur and got to her feet. My mom hesitated, looking at my wife. "You don't like dogs. Should I send Suazi to your uncle's house?" My wife shook her head vigorously, tears streaming even faster. She wiped them away and smiled at Suazi. "Suazi, come on, let's go home together." My wife linked arms with my mom as they walked ahead, with Suazi lazily trailing behind. I heard my wife say, "Mom, if you don't want to live in the city, you can stay here. You'll be close to Dad. We'll come visit you, Dad and Suazi, whenever we can." I stood there, my eyes stinging, tears blurring my vision. I softly whispered to my dad's grave, "Dad, we'll take care of Mom. You can rest easy now." In a haze, I saw my dad standing in front of me, smiling with relief and waving for me to go home with my mom. I nodded firmly, turning and walking quickly toward my mom and wife. "Let's hurry home and clean up the house so we can have a good new year." Suazi turned back to bark at me twice, happily running ahead, just like the little puppy she used to be.